محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والصولة الحيدرية والإسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والعبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكاذمية والحجج الردبية والجود التقوية والنقاوة النقوية والحيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية. اللهم عجل فرجه والسهل مخرجه. أما بعد، فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق. صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatimatul Zahra in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When one examines the famous sermon of Rasulullah, where he introduces the month of Shahr Ramadan, we find that a key theme within the sermon is for a person to recognize the rights of the creation of God around them. For example, Rasulullah would say that within this month, تَحَنَّنُوا فِي أَيْتَامِكُمْ, that within this month show kindness towards the orphans. Or for example, he would say that give honor towards those who are elder than you and show mercy towards those who are younger than you. From these different themes found within the sermon, it goes to show that mankind has a position upon this world which is not a position in isolation, but rather it is in relation towards the creation around them. And that's why when you look at amongst those rights which the creation other than mankind has upon man, then you find without a doubt amongst the greatest of those rights is the rights of the environment upon us. Because one of the most often discussed issues in today's modern world is the issue of the environmental crisis. You know, in recent years when we had the pandemic of COVID, you find that travel ceased in the way that it used to be. There were many studies that came out that when travel began to be halted, much of those environmental issues which we are seeing upon this earth, many of those issues began to be reduced in damage. For example, some studies said that with the advent of COVID, the rate at which the ozone layer in the atmosphere was decaying, that rate began to slow down. Or for example, there were reports of certain species of animals returning after a time period when they weren't in a particular locality. All of these different discussions which discuss the role of the environment and the role that nature plays in the life of man, you find that within the modern world, many of these discussions are superficial and at the outward level. For example, when you hear the issue of the environment, the only discussion that takes place is that what alternate source of energy can we use? Or what can we do differently? But nobody reflects on the level that why is it that mankind has lost that respect for the environment? And why is it that mankind does not view satisfaction in honoring those which are around them? That's why this issue of nature, environment, and the position of man is not just a superficial issue, but rather this is an issue pertaining to understanding what is the purpose of a human being and what is the position of a human being. That's why when you look within the Quran, if you want to understand the position of man, Allah says, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا وَفِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ, that the signs of God are not only on the horizons and outward, but rather the signs of God are present within you, O human being. That's why Amir al-Mu'mineen in a famous tradition would say that, do you think that you are something small, but rather within you is Alamul Akbar, but rather within you is the largest of realms. In other words, in the modern world, you find man has been able to travel towards space, and man has been able to construct societies and cities, the likes of which human society has never seen. But you find one thing which is missing within today's world more than any other society is that ability to reflect inwards and to understand that what is the status of a human being. And tonight's discussion in this majlis, what I'll seek to analyze is what is the purpose of mankind, and once we've understood the purpose of mankind, then we'll understand the relation the human being has to nature and the environment around them. Because when you look at the fundamental importance of this question, we have a tradition from Imam Musa al-Kadhim salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Imam Musa al-Kadhim says that may Allah have mercy upon a person who is able to answer 3 questions. The first question is min ain, the second question is ila ain, the third question is wafi ain. In other words, the first most important question that man should ask is that where did they come from? The Imam says the second question of fundamental importance is where are you going? And the third question of fundamental importance is where are you? And you find that these 3 questions, they can't be answered unless you understand the purpose of man. So in tonight's discussion, when we examine the role between man and nature, and we examine that important question of why is it that there is a crisis of the environment, and why is it that that respect has not been given to the world around us, the first answer to this fundamental question is that mankind has forgotten their purpose, and they've forgotten the fact that they are the vicegerent of Allah. You see, when you look within the Holy Quran, you find that there are a number of verses of the Holy Quran which speak about the status of man, and the role of man, and the function of man, and the purpose of man. You find that from amongst those verses is the verse that says, Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. That when Allah, He created Adam, and He sends Adam for this earth, Allah is saying that I am creating Adam as a khalifa and a vicegerent. Of course, from this verse, the first thing we understand is that a vicegerent and a khalifa, their responsibility is to look after, it is to take care of that which is around them. If mankind understood that their role is of the vicegerent of Allah, then they would understand themselves as the caretaker of nature and as the caretaker of the environment. This discussion would not just be a superficial discussion, but rather it's an inner discussion and a deeper discussion. That's why when you look at the verses of the Quran, you find there are many verses of the Quran that state that all of these different phenomena in nature and everything which is around us has been created for the human being. For example, the Quran says, سَخَّرَ لَكُم مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا. That all of these different entities within the heavens and the earth, all of them, heavens and the earth, all of them have been made what? All of them have been made subservient to man. And when all of them have made subservient to man, you find all of them have a right which must be given. You see, it's only in the modern world that this idea that you can do whatever you want to achieve a means is there. No, one can't exploit anything to the level that they want to reach a desired outcome. Everything has a right. And that right can't be achieved without understanding who is the human being. That's why when you look at the Quran, and you look when the Quran describes what is the purpose of the human being, the Quran says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. That the human being and the jinn have been created. Why? They have been created to worship Allah, to do the ibadat of Allah. But over here the question arises that what ibadat and worship is being mentioned in the Quran? Does that mean we've simply been created to pray and fast and carry out all of these outer worships? But rather, when you look at the tradition of the Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, Imam as-Sadiq in a tradition says that when this verse says لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that mankind and the jinn have been created to worship Allah, but rather what this ibadat is لِيَعْرِفُونَ. In other words, this ibadat and worship which has been mentioned within this verse is that we have been created to gain understanding and ma'rifah. In another tradition, Allah, He speaks in a very powerful hadith al-Qudsi. He says within that hadith that kuntu kanzan makhfiya, that I was a hidden treasure, فَأَحْبَبْتُ أَنْ أَعْرَفْ, and I was a hidden treasure and I loved to be known. فَخَلَقْتُ الْخَلْقِ, so I created the creation in order that they can know me. You know, from this tradition, we understand two very important things. The first thing we understand is that at the core of creation and the reason why Allah created was the love of Allah. Allah, He says, كُنْتُ كَنْزًا مَخْفِيًّا فَأَحْبَبْتُ أَنْ أُعْرَفْ. That Allah desired, Allah had the love to be known. You know, many people, they ask the question, is that what was the fundamental cause of creation? Some said it's because Allah had the power and ability to do so. I say today that if I have the ability to make a table or a mimbar, just because I have the ability and the power to do so doesn't mean I'll carry out that action. Another group said, no, it's because Allah had the knowledge and He wanted to express His knowledge. Once again, if I have the knowledge of something, I am an expert in a subject, it doesn't mean I have to express that knowledge. But the only answer based upon the traditions is that it was the love of Allah to create creation. And when Allah desired to create the human being out of His love, then Allah says, I love to be known. So at the second level, the purpose of man is to know Allah, is to gain the ma'rifah of Allah. And amongst the mechanisms to do so is to understand the world around you. That's why in traditional Islamic thought, when ulama they would write, they would say that when you look, there are two types of books. The first type of book is Al-Kitab al-Tadwini. In other words, that book which has been compiled in reference to the Quran, that this is a book. But at the second level, you have something which is Al-Kitab al-Takwini, the book of nature. When you look at the Quran, if the reality of the Quran was expanded, it would be this universe. And if the reality of this universe would be summarized, it would be that Quran which is in front of us. That's why when you look in the Quran, right? The verses of the Quran are called what? They are called ayat and signs. That what are these verses being a sign of? Because a sign needs to do dalalat upon something, it must indicate something. You find that the verses of the Quran indicate the nature of Allah and who Allah is. But at the same time, when you look within the Quran, and the Quran describes the different phenomenon of nature, whether it is the mountains, whether it is the oceans, whether it is the turning of the wind, whether it is the moon, the Quran uses the same word ayat. In other words, that same word sign, ayat, which is used to describe the Quran, the same word is being used to describe the phenomenon in nature. That's why a person can read the Quran and gain an understanding. But at the same time, when the human being understands his status and position, then he understands that all of this creation and environment around him, all of this is also a sign of Allah. I gave you the tradition 4 or 5 lectures ago of Imam Musa al-Kadhim salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Imam Musa al-Kadhim in that tradition would say that everything you look at is an ibrah. An ibrah, in other words, it is a lesson for you. That it is not possible that if you are reflecting and you look at something, you don't gain a lesson. There is always a lesson, but it's our lack of reflection which takes us away from gaining that lesson. So you find God has given this purpose of mankind, that we are that only creation which has the capacity to understand these signs of Allah around us. And when we've understood this, you find Allah has given an honor and a position to man and the human being which no other creation has been given. For example, in one verse, Allah says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ وَحَمَلْنَاهُمْ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ وَرَزَقْنَاهُمْ مِنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَفَضَّلْنَاهُمْ عَلَى كَثِيرٍ مِّمَّنْ خَلَقْنَاهُ تَفْضِيلًا. You know what Allah says in this verse? He says, we have given karama and honor to the children of Adam. When we carried him upon the land and the ocean, and we gave him of those sustenance which was pure, which was tayyib, and we preferred him over the majority of creation. You see, in this verse, we find that there are 2 factors being mentioned. The first factor is the status of mankind being preferred over the rest of creation. And the second factor is the honor which was given towards mankind. You know, in terms of being preferred in this ayat, many people, they ask the question, is that why does this verse say that we have been preferred over kathiran mimman khalaqna? Over many of that which has been created, why not jami'an mimman khalaqna? Why not all of that's been created? That people, they ask this question, that if man is ashraful makhluk and the best of creation, the Quran says that you have been preferred over the majority. That what is that minority which mankind hasn't been preferred over? And over here you find that it's important for us to understand the structure of the Arabic language. Once we've understood that structure, we'll understand that this verse gives the ultimate honor to mankind. Because you find that honor is of 2 types. One type of honor is in your essence and your nature. The second type of honor and preference, it comes from your action as well. You know, Allah says within the Quran, إِنَّا خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِينٍ, that we created mankind in the best of forms. But what is this form that the Quran is referring to? Because the moment a person dies and that body becomes cold, you touch that body, then you become najis. That is the reality of a human being. The entire life of a person, you knew that person, you would call them by their name. But the moment they die, you don't take their name anymore. You don't say, this is Abbas, this is Muhammad. You say, this is the mayyit. This is the body lift the body, do ghusl to the body. All of these different examples goes to show that this ahsani taqween, this best of form, is not in reference to the body. Because the moment this body becomes cold after passing away, this body is najis if you touch it. And no one calls that body by the name of that person. This goes to show that best of forms that this Quran is referring to, that best of forms is in reference to the human spirit and the human potential. Now I come back to this verse. This verse says that you have been preferred over the majority of creation. In other words, O human being, if you can fulfill your potential, if you can truly be insan, then you are the best of creation. But not everyone reaches that status of truly being insan. That's why when the Quran, it describes a group of individuals who have no goals within their lives. All they do is eat, drink, reproduce. They don't think farther than that. The Quran doesn't describe them as human beings. It says, "Ulaika kal an'am bal hum adallu." That these individuals are like cattle, they aren't like humans. You know, another tradition, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, Amir al-Mu'mineen in a tradition would say that the mayyit or the dead body is of two types. The first is that mayyit which is horizontal and lays upon the ground. The second is that mayyit which is standing and walking amongst you. In other words, if a person is not fulfilling their purpose upon this earth, and they are not fulfilling that goal of understanding Allah, then at that point you find that that individual, it's as if he is dead. Because he is not moving in a direction. When a person is dead, when a body is dead, there is no movement. That lack of movement is a sign of their death. When a human being spiritually has no movement, then you find that individual is spiritually dead according to the traditions of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. So you find that from the first level, for there to be a respect which is given to the environment and to nature and to the rest of creation, from the first level we need to understand what is the status of the human being, the purpose of the human being, and to recognize the fact that the human being is the Khalifa and the vicegerent of Allah. When we've understood that the human being is the vicegerent of Allah, then at the second level we'll come to understand that the nature and the world around us has a right upon us. When you look at the traditions of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, you find that the traditions of Ahlul Bayt show what understanding Ahlul Bayt had of nature. If you want to understand in this month of Shahr Ramadan, this month which has been described by the revelation of the Quran, as the Quran says, Shahru Ramadan, Alladhi unzila fihi al-Quran. I ask you the question that where was the Quran revealed in its first revelation? The Quran was not revealed inside of a house, nor was the Quran revealed in an urban city center. But the Quran was revealed in the mountain of Hira when Rasulullah he would go. It stated that within the month of Shahr Ramadan, Rasulullah would leave that dwelling center and he would go spend time where? He would go spend time in nature in the cave of Hira. Further than that, if you want to understand the significance of the world around us in nature, how many of the chapters of the Quran are named after natural phenomenon? For example, we'll have Suratul Fajr, which is named after the daybreak. Or we'll have Suratul Shams, which is named after the mountain. We'll have Suratul Baqarah, about the cattle. We'll have Suratul Namal, which is about the ant. And so on and so forth. I can give dozens and dozens of examples. All of these different examples goes to show that the world around us should have a significant function within our life. And it's only within the modern world that we've become disconnected from nature in the way we become disconnected. And I'll give you a very fine example. In the olden times, Allah would go and show time and time again that what is our relationship with nature. You know, even in the Shariat and the law, how does one calculate the time of Salat? The time of Dhuhr and Asr is based upon the shadow of the sun, that they would put a stick within the ground, and when they would look at that shadow changing, they would know that this is the time of Dhuhr, this is the time of Asr. Or the time of Maghrib is by looking at the redness in the eastern horizon or at the disk of the sun. All of these different measurements in the Sharia showed that mankind was supposed to have a relationship with nature. Yes, in the modern world we have clocks, we have different mechanisms. They aren't something which are negative in and of themselves. But the point that I'm making is the way the human being was designed is that we need to have an understanding of the world around us. We can't just be confined within our homes and with our technology all the time. Ahlul Bayt, when they would speak of nature, they would give right towards the nature. For example, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq in a tradition says that giving water to a date tree or a lot tree, you know, a tree of khujur as we say in Urdu, is like giving water to a believer that is thirsty. That what example does the Imam give? That when you see a thirsty believer, a person who is in a state of thirst, immediately you feel the pain of that individual. You recognize that this is a creation. Imam as-Sadiq is saying that to give water towards a date tree is like giving water to a thirsty believer. In another tradition, Imam as-Sadiq says that to farm and to plant is from amongst the best of actions. So this goes and shows that we need to have a type of consciousness of the environment. Unfortunately, you know, in Shahr Ramadan often, that when we sit at the mosque, we are not aware of the impact that these resources have upon the environment. That we'll grab as many napkins as we want without recognizing how many we need or not. If we need an extra styrofoam plate, we'll have one plate for our salan, one plate for our rice, one plate for our iftar, one plate for our dessert. But you find that this is something which we need to think about, because the followers of Ahlul Bayt recognize the right of every single thing. Amir al-Mu'mineen, for example, it's stated that Imam Ali planted 1,000 trees within his life. And Rasulullah, in a separate tradition, one day they see Rasulullah planting a tree. And they said to Rasulullah that you're planting a date tree. By the time this tree it grows, you're not going to be alive, because to plant a date tree takes decades and decades and decades. Rasulullah replies by saying that if I am not alive, then this is a sadaqatul jariyah. That this is that sadaqah which will continue. And he says, how many trees were there that I did not plant but I ate from them? In that way, there will be somebody who benefits from this. You know, every single leader in society would give rules and regulations. But if you look at the level of haqq which Islam gave towards each of the creation, you find that it's something that bewilders you. You know, when Rasulullah would go to battle, he would say that do not harm any children, nor will you harm any women, nor will you harm those who are elderly. But then he would say that if there is a source of water, do not pollute that source of water. And do not cut down trees unnecessarily. And even more interestingly enough, I remember I was reading a work of writing written by someone. They said that the very first concept of a national park, you know, oftentimes in our lands we have national parks, that you can't harm the animals there. You can't harm the vegetation there. He says the first resemblance of a sacred area where you can't cause harm to the creation was the concept of the haram in Islam. Because when you look at the concept of the haram or the sacred land in Mecca, you find that one can't hunt within that land. If you hunt, there is a kafara that you give. You find that there are certain types of harms that you can't do within that land, and many of you who've gone to Hajj know the difficulty of this situation. So you find that this was a type of sanctity which is given, and that's why the time has once again come for us to regain that sanctity. And that sanctity is regained, number one, by understanding the status of the human being, which I discussed in this lecture. And number two, understanding our relationship of those creation which have rights upon us. As I said, Ahlul Bayt recognize the right of everyone. When you look at Imam al-Hussein in Karbala, Imam al-Hussein in Karbala gave example after example of what it means to recognize the rights of the creation. When Imam al-Hussein comes upon the 2nd of Muharram, what does the Imam do? The Imam, he purchases the land of Karbala from Banu Asad. That he recognized that when I will be martyred over here, this place will become a source of ziyarah and visitation. But when it becomes a source of ziyarah and visitation, I don't want it to cause adhiya and difficulty to the people who own this land. So what will I do? I'll purchase this land from Banu Asad, and I'll give them the conditions that when I purchase this land, when we pass away, bury our bodies. And when my zawar and my visitors come for 3 days, look after the zawar. If you want to understand that what was Sayyid al-Shuhada, these same people who would deny Imam al-Hussein water, it stated that Imam al-Hussein, before he meets the army of Hur, he had told his companions that take extra water with you. When they go and they meet the army of Hur, you find Sayyid al-Shuhada, when he encounters that army, he says to his companion, now go and give these individuals water. You know, there was a man by the name of Ali ibn Ti'an. This individual narrates that I was the last to join the army of Hur, and everyone else had been given water. As I was the last to join, I saw a man who comes up to me. And that man, he says that lower your horse, lower your camel, whatever the ride was. I said to him that I'll lower the horse. That man, Ali ibn Ti'an says, he began with his hands to give me water, and with his hands he would give water towards my ride. Later on, I would say that who was that man? They would say that, do you not know who Hussein ibn Ali is? You see, this is how Imam al-Hussein recognized the right of those around them. And this is what made Karbala such a sorrow. You know, people, they discussed what made Karbala such a tragedy. There were other battles where people were killed. And there were other battles where people were denied water. But what made Karbala such a tragedy is that nowhere else was there an individual like Sayyid al-Shuhada. And nowhere else was a dhulm and oppression done like that oppression upon the family of Imam al-Hussein. And one of those greatest musibah was the musibah of the daughter of Sayyid al-Shuhada. You know, it's stated upon the night of Sham-e Ghariba, it's stated that water was brought to the tents of Ahlul Bayt. And when water was brought to the tents of Ahlul Bayt, Sayyida Zainab would go and give the children water first. as she's giving the children water, she gives water towards Sakina. You know what Sakina she does? She takes that water and she begins to go towards the maqtal, towards the battlefield. Sayyida Zainab says, "Oh Sakina, where are you going?" You know what she replies by saying? She said, "Oh my Aunt Zainab, you are the one who said that we should give water towards children first. I am going to go and find where my brother Ali Asghar is." That what was that musibah of Sham Ghariba? You know, it's stated at one point, Sayyida Zainab, as she's counting the children, she notices that the daughter of Imam al-Hussein is missing. As she notices Sakina isn't there, she goes towards the maqtal. As she's calling the name of Sakina, she hears a voice from the cut body of Sayyid al-Shuhada. That voice, it said, "Oh Zainab, Sakina is upon my chest, oh Zainab." You know, when they said to that daughter, that how did you recognize your father? Either you recognize someone through their face or through their clothing. That they had cut the head of your father, that clothing they didn't leave. Sakina says that as I was going past the body of my father, I heard a voice from the cut head of my father. That voice that said, "Ilayya, Ilayya ya bunayya." That, "Oh my daughter, come towards me." Ala la'natullah lil qawm al-zalimin. Ya Allah, we ask through the right of the Musibah Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, wherever the followers of Ahlul Bayt are in difficulty, help them. Wherever they're sick and ailing, cure them. There are many in this gathering who have hajat. There are individuals who have difficulties with their rizq and sustenance. There are individuals with family problems. There are individuals with health problems. Ya Allah, through the right of the Masayib of Sayyid al-Shuhada, help these individuals. Ya Allah, we pray for the ziyarah of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We pray for the hastening of the reappearance of the 12th from Ali Muhammad. رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. For each of your marhumin, the marhumin of the sponsors of tonight's iftar, for those members of this community who have passed away, as well as those who have no one to recite Fatiha over them. One time Surah Al-Fatiha, three times Surah Al-Tawheed. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين عليًا ولي الله أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين عليًا حجج الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله حي على السلام حي على السلام حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير الأمل هي على خير الأمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على محمد الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانهر إن شانئك هو الأبتر الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته يقوم وأقعد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. يا الله يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك بحق محمد وآله الأطهار. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله وقوته يقوم وأقعد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا علي يا عظيم يا غفور يا رحيم. أنت رب العظيم الذي ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. وهذا شهر نظمته وكرمته وشرفته وفضلته على الشهور. وهو شهر الذي فرضت صيامه علي. وهو شهر رمضان الذي أنزلت فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. وجعلت فيه ليلة القدر وجعلتها خيرا من ألف شهر. ويا ذا المن ولا يمن عليك من علي بفكاك رقبتي من النار في من تمن عليه وادخل الجنة برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم ادخل أهل القبور السرور، اللهم اغن كل فقير، اللهم اشبع كل جائع، اللهم اكس كل عريان، اللهم زد دين كل مدين، اللهم فرج كل مكروب، اللهم ارد كل غريب، اللهم فك كل أسير، اللهم اصلح كل فاسد من أمور المسلمين، اللهم اشف كل مريض، اللهم سد فقرنا بغناك، اللهم غير سهالنا بحسن حالك، اللهم اغزنا الدين واغننا من الفقر إنك على كل شيء قدير.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى
वो भी एक सूरह फातिहा की गुजारिश है मरहूमीन के लिए। बहदानी एंड फैमिली, अस्करी अमीर, खैसर सुल्ताना, इमदाद असगर नकवी, अनवरी बेगम, हिदायत हुसैन रजवी और जुमला मोमिनात की आवाज़ के लिए सूरह फातिहा।
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير الأمل حي على خير الأمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته يقوم وقعد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. يا الله يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك بحق محمد وآله الأطهار. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته يقوم ويقعد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم يا لطيف ارحم عبدك النعيم. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. يا علي. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا علي يا عظيم يا غفور يا رحيم. أنت الرب العظيم الذي ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. وهذا شهر نظمته وكرمت وشرفته وفضلت على الشهور، وهو شهر الذي فرضت صيامه عليه، وهو شهر رمضان الذي أنزلت فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان، وجعلت فيه ليلة القدر، وجعلت خيرا من ألف الشهر. فيا ذا المن ولا يمن عليك، من علي بفكاك رقبتي من النار، في من تمن علي وادخل الجنة برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم ادخل على أهل القبور السرور، اللهم اغنى كل فقير، اللهم اشبع كل جائع، اللهم اكس كل عريان، اللهم سد عين كل مدين، اللهم فرج عن كل مكروب، اللهم ارد كل غريب، اللهم فك كل أسير، اللهم أصلح كل فاسد من أمور المسلمين، اللهم اشف كل مريض، اللهم سد فخرنا بغناك، اللهم غير سوء حالنا بحسن حالك، اللهم اغزرنا الدين واغننا من الفقر، إنك على كل شيء قدير.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله خاتم النبيين، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي، السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين، السلام عليكم يا تسة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء، السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولاي صاحب الزمان، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن وكعبة الإيمان، عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.